The world of Terra is cruel. A knight can push back against corruption. A scientist can shatter the sky. A hunter might even slay an evil god. Regardless, the cold indifference of Terra pushes back against all equally. What good is showing a system is corrupt if one cannot slay? What good is splitting the sky if none can fathom the heights that must be reached after? And what good is slaying a god if the next great threat to the world is the one who slayed it? Babel opens up with the Doctor stripped of their memories, Amia cursed as the Lord of Fiends, and with the greatest hope of the Sorcas, Teresa lying dead. Babel is not a hopeful event. It seeks to remind the reader that life on Terra is never easy, and often forces outside of one's control will take everything from you and the ones you love. And sometimes the one who takes everything from you is one of those very people you love the most. The story of Babel, in that regard, is the story of Terra, an avoidable tragedy set in motion by forces far beyond the control of any one king. But just because one can't control it doesn't mean they must accept it outright. Babel is perhaps the best event I have read since Lone Trail. It is a perfect prequel to the story of Arknights, providing an unimaginable amount of trauma to the community on a level that I'm not sure any event has achieved before. And right from the beginning, you know the end. So of course the story sets the tone immediately by opening with the death of Teresa, with the cold and calculating Calcet for the first time in the story being genuinely afraid, not of any enemy, but of the scene she knows awaits her. So we the readers are sent back to relive the events leading up to the death of the Sorcas king, as well as the story of how the ghost of Babel became the Doctor of Rhodes Island. From that description alone, you know that this event is heavy, a genuinely depressing and bleak event, but not one that is completely without hope. Despite the horrors of war and Originium that inflict terror, hope always exists, even in the darkest of moments. And that hope takes the form of a young girl and a man deprived of all but himself, Amia and the Doctor, who, despite the positions both end up in at the end of the event, we know continue to hold the flame of hope high, despite everything that has been lost. To describe the lore reveals of this event as being enormous genuinely feels like an understatement. From Originium to the Sorcas, from Kazdel to the first civilization, Babel is completely full of reveals and information that not only expand on the world, but recontextualize much of what we have seen as part of our journey through Terra. As such, it only feels fitting to start with the Sorcas as the origin point for this discussion. The race formerly known as the Ticaz, the Devils of Terra, have been through untold amounts of suffering over the millennia of Terra's history, from the destruction of the home of the Sorcas, Kazdel, thousands of times, to the role they are forced to play in other countries. Existence for the Sorcas has never been more than a fleeting dream, which is why Teresa and Teresa's goal of creating a Kazdel that can truly exist in the modern world is both inspiring and foolish. They know the risks they have taken. The existence of Sorcas is something that the other nations of Terra allow only insofar as the Sorcas benefit them. They are to be fodder thrown into war so that others may live. And of course, this has fostered hatred within the Sorcas, a hatred for life and a hatred for Terra. And as such, Teresa wishes to break the cycle of hatred and bring about a united world that has set hatred aside. Teresa, on the other hand, believes that this is a far-fetched dream that neither the Sorcas nor Terra would be able to abide. But despite their differences, the two siblings stand side by side, at least at the beginning, refusing to submit to a fate that would doom them and their people. And they have a plan to reform the Sorcas society from the top down, so it's not just lofty ideals. A new military commission for Kazdel is formed, one that will embody the will of Teresa's and support the dreams of the Sorcas king. But saving only the Sorcas is not enough for Teresa, and she forms the organization of Babel, that which would eventually become Rhodes Island. Babel dreams of curing Oripity, of overcoming Originium entirely, and bringing together all the people of the world under one common understanding. So Teresa, with the aid of Calcet and those who share her dream, attempts to bring that dream into reality within the land of the Sorcas. But outside forces and centuries of hatred crush even the King of Sorcas' dream. Teresa and Teresa's, the two who understand each other the best, and the two who created Kazdil, inevitably creating two diametrically opposed entities, one embodying the hate of the Sarkaz, and one embodying the hope of the Sarkaz. And peace, unfortunately, was never an option between the two, with hatred being the fuel that has kept the Sarkaz alive through the destruction of so many Kazdils. Most refuse to let go of that fire. And so, despite being the king of her people, Teresa is unable to prevent the civil war that will tear apart not just her people, but her dream. Her dream of unifying all people under the banner of Babel is not one that she could ever hope to achieve in her lifetime, but with the help of Khalsid, perhaps she could find one who could achieve that goal for her. One that could overcome Oripathy, one that could lead Terra to a future that its people can only dream of. The Ghost of Babel, one of the final members of the first civilization, the Doctor of Rose Island, an enigmatic figure with goals far beyond the understanding of one Sarkaz. Awakened by Khalsid early, the Doctor explores a land entirely unfamiliar to them, one where Oripathy is a curse that claims the lives of all who fall beneath its spectre. An alien among those who understand the world around them, but are so far removed from that they struggle to feel the weight of responsibility to cure anyone. That is until a young girl crosses their path. Amia sparks a desire to save Terra within the Doctor, a desire to resist the will of the first civilization and protect the life Terra has formed. But the first civilization of Terra was powerful beyond belief. Interstellar travel, terraforming, the creation of technology so advanced that is basically magic, and of course, the creator of Originium. The very Doctor who strives to cure Oripathy is immune to the effects of the curse that strangles all those around them, which is because they are the very creator of that curse. But to the first civilization, it is not a curse, but a cure, one that will transcend life to a next further stage of evolution, one that will blanket the world in Originium and bring about enlightenment to the inhabitants of Terra. Originium works upon the principle of transferring information into Originium, a utopia that can store all the world's information in one place. And by blanketing the world in Originium, all the world would reach the assimilated universe. But even still, the Doctor is conflicted. The inhabitants of Terra do not benefit from this blessing. These people are cursed by this utopia. And so who is the Doctor to not seek to cure that which destroys the lives of all it touches? Even knowing that Originium is in fact just data made manifest, storing the information of all it claims within the Originium network, the Doctor still laments for those around them, especially for Amia, whom they have grown to love dearly. The needs of the first civilization, or the needs of the priestess, come before all for this version of the Doctor. And so, the Doctor sentences the King of Sarkaz to death. But the King of Sarkaz sentenced the Ghost of Babel to life, to finally escape the burdens of their responsibility in order to become who they truly are. The King of Sarkaz erases the Doctor's mind, giving the Doctor one last blessing and one last chance to save Terra in the form of the Doctor we know and love today. There are many characters within Babel, and of course they're not all equally focused on, but the event is rather streamlined and focused onto a certain few characters. So before we discuss the story, let's just run through them. Starting off with our Banner 6-star, Ascalon. And I feel bad for Ascalon, not because she's a terrible character. Her character is actually great. From a child wandering the wastes of Kazdil to an assassin raised by the king and the general of the Sarkaz. One who is both a capable combatant and one who cares for life, but one who can also only realize what she has lost when it is already too late. That is reason enough to feel bad for her and to really empathize with the character, which is what they set up during this event. Unfortunately, I feel bad for her for reasons entirely unrelated to her character, and that is because she is completely overshadowed in this event. This event could have been entirely based around making Ascalon the peakest of peak fiction characters, but because Babel was truly the story of Teresa and the Doctor, Ascalon, despite being a major focus character, does feel like she's playing a backseat in her own event, which is tragic, but that doesn't make Ascalon a bad character. Likewise, our welfare unit Oda, the author of the hit Terran manga The One Piece, is also completely overshadowed. He has an interesting origin, being the son of a slave freed by Teresis and a doctor from Babel, so he was fated to be tied up between the battle of siblings. From meeting Manfred as a child to his father being murdered by Ascalon, he has not had an easy life. but he followed Teresa regardless, never really learning who killed his father, which would have actually been a very interesting plot point if they had delved into it. But because this event was not focused on building up a character like Oda, this potential character interaction and potential character building moment was never really capitalized on. And so he kind of exists in that overshadowed by pretty much everyone category in this event, which is tragic because I felt like he had a lot of potential. Rolling all the elite operators into one section, we get to see the elite operators in action. Well, at least the older ones that have been fighting alongside Rhodes Island and Teresa and the Doctor for years. Scout, Ace, Mantra, Logos. Not all of them are familiar faces, shout out to Mantra, she's hot as fuck, but all are near and dear to the heart of Rhodes Island. With Ace and Scout being old friends of the Doctor and long dead in the current story, it was nice to get some time with them. And although Logos only played a minor role, his story is very much in focus within the main story. So this is a little bit of extra build up for his role within chapter 14. And we at least get to put a name on the face of the MILF that is his mother. Manfred, another character that gets a lot of focus in the second act of Arknights' main story, gets his backstory expanded upon here. Little Manfred has clearly been drinking nothing but protein shakes since Ascalon traumatized him though. Being another child taken in by Teresa's, Manfred has a close relationship with both of the Sorkas siblings. Loving and respecting Teresa despite siding with Teresa's, even sabotaging the Kazdal Military Commission's operations when battling Babel. He and Ascalon both mirror each other in this event, coming from relatively similar upbringings, at least after being taken in by Teresa's. The two position themselves across the Sorkas divide when the Civil War breaks out, with one being an impeccable assassin and the other being a straight up military soldier. Their approaches to combat show their different approaches to life, with one easily dedicating himself to a cause, while the other questions her place in the world until the time to make the decision has long passed. The talkative cat Calcit returns in this event with a very different role than usual. She is far more upbeat when compared to the cynical version of herself in the main story. Having found someone that she truly believes in, Calcit strives to support Teresa's dream in any way that she can. And so Calcit is the one who leads Teresa to the one she hopes will be their salvation, and makes the decision to awaken the Doctor. A decision that I'm sure she has questioned many times following the conclusion of this event. For following the awakening of the Doctor, Calcit would take on a background role in the event, ignorant to the forces that she had unleashed, and only realizing what the one she had hoped would save them was capable of when it was far too late. Teresa's the general of the Sorkas and the leader of the Kazdal Military Commission. Teresa's is a fascinating figure, being the only person aside from Calcit who understood the Sorkas king, a humble swordsman who became a legendary hero. Teresa's is in many ways an ordinary man who has reached the pinnacle of his people through sheer effort and determination. Chosen alongside his sister to lead the Sorkas following the destruction of Kazdal, led by Calcit, vowing to be the sword that cut down all that stood in the way of his sister's dream, their paths would inevitably diverge, as they could never compromise on what was to be their ultimate goal. Teresa's chose the path of violence, unwilling to allow the other nations of Terra to decide the fate of the Sorkas, and when the hatred of Kazdal forced Babel from the Sorkas capital, the civil war was bound to begin. But despite much of his following being fueled by this hatred, Teresa's himself simply uses it as a tool to achieve his goal, taking his time to raise the Sorkas around him into competent allies like Manfred or into powerful enemies like Ascalon. But despite his somewhat noble intentions, Teresa's chose to forsake the difficult march towards peace and understanding, which would put him at odds with his sister and made the war with Babel inevitable. Despite that, Teresa's never stopped loving and respecting his sister, viewing her as his equal despite the different paths the two walked. Despite that love, when the opportunity presented itself, he chose to allow the Doctor to decide the fate of Teresa, destroying her dream or destroying her. And even when the events that would lead to her death were set in motion, he demanded the assassins of Teresa to attempt to claim his life, to prove that Teresa's vision had merit, to reinforce in his mind that the path he must walk was the only path available to the Sorkas. As a character who is vital to the story of Act 2 and really hasn't received much development so far, this event was what we needed in regards to developing Teresa's into a fully fledged character, and has made him one of my favorite antagonists. The protagonist of Arknights, the wonderful donkey of Arknights. Babel lets us see the origins of Amia alongside the Doctor. We never get a chance to see her before she was infected. From the moment Amia enters the Doctor's life, she is tormented by the cruelty of Terra's world. Found by the Doctor in the burning wreck of the mining vehicle that was her home, the Doctor quite literally lifts the young girl from the darkness of Terra, protecting her from the cruelty of those who would have abandoned her and giving her a new family. Initially just the Doctor and Savage, and then Teresa, Calcit, and all of Babel. The Doctor is motivated by this one ordinary child to cure the world of heripathy, using their own body to help cure her, creating the foundation of Rhodes Island's medicine. Unbeknownst to Amia, her very existence shatters the Doctor's worldview and causes them to act against their own race's best interests. And by the end of Teresa's life, Amia, an ordinary child, a victim of the world's cruelty, is chosen to be the next king of the Sorkas. Cursed by both her adopted parents, Amia would be the one both would place their hopes for a better world upon, which is of course the story that is going to be playing out in Arknight's main story going forward. Teresa, the king of the Sorkas, the seamstress who became the hope of not just her race, but of all of Terra. The founder of Babel, Teresa was the one who intended to rid the world of infection, to unite all nations under one banner. And so Babel was open to all of Terra's races, despite the tensions that caused among the Sorkas. But the world was not kind enough to wait for her Babel to discover the cure to heripathy, and Kasdal came under attack by a Latanian noble. And despite successfully repelling the invasion, Babel would inevitably be forced to leave Kasdal behind and enter an open civil war amongst the Sorkas. This civil war would of course inevitably lead to the death of Teresa and the Sorkas' occupation of Victoria. Teresa was the one who encouraged the Sorkas to find the life outside of hatred, and even though they couldn't move past it, she still attempted to teach the children a better way. Unfortunately, the one who advanced her dream of a world without hatred the most would be the one that ended her life. And so, the final character that needs to be talked about is the legendary Ghost of Babel. Arknight's protagonist's backstory is finally placed on full display. Well, at least their time while working for Babel. The Doctor comes from an ancient human society, the first civilization, a race of effectively godlike beings thanks to the technology that they possessed. And the Doctor was one of their most capable minds, being the creator of Originium, and the one both Calcit and Teresa trusted the most to solve the Originium plaguing Terra. The Doctor, however, doesn't intend to aid Babel. Originium covering the world is the aim of the first civilization. However, the Doctor didn't intend for Originium to affect biological life. And upon meeting Amia, cracks begin to appear in their determination. Who are they to abandon centuries of their civilization's last hope? But the Doctor cares, and his love for Amia leads him to create medicine to help the infected. However, the dreams of his civilization still live in his head, and so they begin to prepare for the destruction of Babel, providing Teresa's the means of assassinating his sister in exchange for sparing the members of Babel. Teresa's fate was sealed by the Doctor's own actions. But before Teresa died, she had one final gift for the Doctor, the erasing of their memories, allowing for the Doctor we know and love today to come into existence. Maintaining that core identity, the Doctor could do exactly what they asked Calcit to do thousands of years ago: find out who they truly are. The story of Babel, like I said, begins at the end of Babel, on the day of Teresa's death. Babel is attempting to take control of Kasdal, while the Kasdal Military Commission is beginning its occupation of Victoria. Babel has even sent their own assassins to attempt to prevent Teresa from succeeding. However, the Kasdal Military Commission has its own plans for dealing with Babel. With the Doctor aiding their plans, Babel was doomed to fail from the start. While operators like Ascalon are busy with battles outside of Babel, the assassins sent by Teresa's enter the Babel landship. And while the assassins sent to kill Teresa's have agreed to follow his orders following their failure, Calcit rushes through the Rhodes Island landship in a desperate attempt to reach Teresa before it's too late, finding only the aftermath of the assassination upon her arrival. And so the event tells the story as it began. The journey to the tragic outcome began over 100 years prior to to the day that would end the dream of Babel, the fall of Kasdal, led by the Grand Alliance of Terra. Despite being a victory for the Sorkas, it was Pyrrhic in nature, as Kasdal was reduced to ruins. But hope was born there as the black crown of the Sorkas presented itself to the twin heroes, and as such the Dream of Babel and the Kasdal Military Commission was formed on that day, divisions that would shape the future of the Sorkas for centuries to come. Under the two, Kasdal would begin its slow but steady reconstruction. And so, 60 years prior to the death of Teresa, the twins would make their way to the Skar Market, the base of operation for Sorkas mercenaries across Kasdal. There, Teresa's would challenge all the Sorkas mercenaries to battle him, seeking to drag all the Sorkas back to the city of Kasdal to aid in restoring it to its former glory. While all that goes down, Teresa meets with the leader of the Skar Market, Scar-Eye, where she convinces him of the need for a strong Kasdal. But that is not enough, and the two begin rearranging the ruling class of the Sorkas, reforming the War Council into the Kasdal Military Commission and bringing all the royal court onto their side. Teresa also takes this opportunity to found Babel. For a time, things were going well, but it was of course not to last. A Latanian noble decided to launch an attack on Kasdal to wipe it off the face of Terra once more. However, they attempted to recruit the Skar Market to their cause, assuming the Sorkas would turn on each other as they used to, and so, due to the good relationship between Kasdal and the Skar Market, knowledge of the attack was known well in advance. Despite that, casualties were inevitable, and during the battle a catastrophe struck. Teresa and Teresa's led Kasdal through the storm, where they would meet Ascalon for the first time, with Teresa's taking her in and training her to become the woman we know today. Due to the attack on Kasdal being led by Latanian, in the aftermath of the battle, a Babel doctor who was from Latania was killed by a Sorkas soldier. While Teresa tried to punish the man for the attack, Teresa's prevented justice from being served due to wishing to maintain peace among the Sorkas. This was, unfortunately, the beginning of the end of Babel's time in Kasdal, as following the attack, fewer Sorkas put their fate in the organization. However, it was around that time that Manfred would join the Kasdal Military Commission and begin loaning through the Babel organization. So Teresa held out hope. It was however a doomed cause, and the cracks would split into canyons as the years passed. And as tensions were reaching a boiling point, Teresa made the tough decision to leave Kasdal behind, and Babel moved its operations to the Rhodes Island landship. Here, the lines of the Civil War were drawn, with Teresa and Teresa's relationship effectively ending here, as the two would never meet again before the death of Teresa. Ascalon and Manfred would also choose their sides at this point in the conflict, both choosing to place their fate in Babel and the Kasdal Military Commission respectively. It was into this tense scenario that the Doctor would enter the scene. Calcit, hoping to aid in Teresa's goals of ending the terror of Originium, would open the sarcophagus containing the Doctor. This would mark the first meeting of the Ghost of Babel and the King of Sorkas, echoing their final encounter that was still years away at this point. The Doctor does promise to aid Babel, but first they wish to experience Terra as it is now. During their travels, the Doctor would rescue Amia from an accident that resulted in her infection, refusing to leave her at the mercy of Rimbilaten's government. Although they would not realize it yet, the love the Doctor develops for his adopted daughter would lead them to question everything they believe in. And so the Doctor returns to Rhodes Island and begins developing more effective Originium treatments. After returning, Teresa would be the one to welcome the Doctor and Amia to the landship, taking on a motherly role to Amia. Although not stated, I would assume she doesn't plan on cursing Amia with the Black Crown at this point. Shortly after the Doctor's return, Teresa would show them what they had learned about Originium, showing them a small patch of land that she had transformed into a field of flowers. She had developed a method of restoring the information stored in Originium to reality. This is perhaps the greatest step forward for Originium studies that Terrans had ever achieved. But to the Doctor, it was a conflicting affair. The means of undoing the work of their dead civilization is within reach. The means of saving those cursed by this rock can be achieved, but it would mean undoing all of their life's work. Despite their growing doubts, the Doctor still walks towards a cure, wishing to save Amia from her fate. They begin using themselves as a test subject as they are immune to Originium, and it begins showing promising signs. Although it does result in them passing out in front of Amia, which makes everyone worried. Teresa, using the Black Crown, peers into the Doctor's mind and gets to observe the potential future of Terra, a world covered in Originium. But Teresa continues to trust the Doctor due to feeling their genuine desire to save Amia. Eventually, the conflict raging within the Doctor reaches a breaking point, and they organize a meeting with Teresa's. Attempting to end the dream that is Babel, the Doctor wishes to aid Teresa's in bringing an end to the Sorcas civil war. Teresa had already failed to reach a peaceful conclusion, and Teresa's plan for entering Victoria were nearing their final stage. So the Doctor offers Teresa's salvation, the Shroud, a super weapon capable of controlling Originium itself. But that alone is not enough for Teresa's. Only the death of Teresa could truly end the dream of Babel, and so the Doctor must kill her. By doing so, Teresa's promises to spare what is left after the deed is done. Of course, the Doctor is reluctant at this prospect. They care deeply about Teresa by this point, but they agree regardless. The great work of the first civilization must be completed, and so the Doctor leads Babel towards the decisive conclusion of the Civil War, planning to take Casdell once Teresa's and the main body of the Casdell Military Commission has gone to Victoria. Deploying the entire elite operator staff, led by Calcid, the Doctor remains behind to protect Teresa and the landship. Teresa could sense something was wrong with the Doctor, but unsure as to what it is, the Doctor's plans go off without a hitch. They, despite questioning everything about themselves, shut down the defense system, and assassins sent by Teresa's enter the landship. Unbeknownst to the Doctor, Amia made their way to Teresa, which forces Teresa to protect Amia while assassins bear down upon her. Successfully fending off the first wave, Teresa tells Amia about her failure to bring about her dream, which upsets Amia greatly. Teresa, seeing the conviction in the young girl, gives Amia the power to change the story's ending, bestowing the crown of the Sorcas upon her. Right after that, the Doctor arrives with more assassins. Teresa questions why the Doctor would come after all they had done, but realizes that the guilt of not seeing her is what drove them to present themselves. Although saddened by their betrayal, she knows that the Doctor loves Amia and wishes to cure her despite the conflict in their heart. And so, in an act of revenge and love, Teresa erases the Doctor's memories, seeing all the moments that led up to this betrayal. The time spent with Babel, the guilt over what they had done, and their first meeting with Amia that created this guilt in the first place. Finally, Teresa meets the old Doctor from before the sarcophagus, and Oracle, the Doctor's codename at the time, thanks Teresa for trusting them until the end, before the last of their memories is erased. This leads us to the beginning of the event, but the end of Babel. Teresa dies on the floor, holding Amia. She gets to speak to Calcid one last time through the young girl before fading away. Calcid takes the Doctor to Chonabug, where they will rest until Amia comes for them later. Teresa's has become the sole ruler of the Sorcas, and the occupation of Victoria would begin now, setting the stage for the Victoria arc. Babel might be in ruins, but those who inherited Teresa's will would form Rhodes Island. So even without their leader, the dream of a united Terra lives on through them. And that's Babel. Not a very light event, from the lore reveals to the story itself. Babel is without a doubt an event sure to force some form of emotion from its readers. And considering the amount of people I've seen online talking about how they hate the Doctor now, it must certainly have done its job well. And yes, the Doctor has committed crimes that many would not be able to forgive, but it has certainly made them a more well-rounded character as a result. The story of Teresa isn't quite over yet, as her presence in the Victoria arc still leaves at least one thread that must be resolved. And without spoiling chapter 14, which will be releasing after Babel, we do get a conclusion to her story, although one that I'm sure might be controversial among some people. Babel, as I have said before, is a fantastic example of a prequel story. It has essentially done the perfect setup for the beginning of Arknights' main story, by placing all the main cast into the required places, allowing for a smooth transition from Babel to Act 0 and even Act 2. Obviously, I'm not saying to start with Babel, cause some of the characters require a little context to get the full impact out of their role in this event. I'm going to guess that the setup in this event in regards to Originium and the first civilization will no doubt play a large role going forward in the main story. And I will be looking forward to seeing how the Priestess plays into the developing story of the Doctor. Also, based on how great this event was, I want more events set in the past of Arknights' world. Like, we get mentions of the destruction of Gaul in this event, and I would very much like to see some of that story told to us in event format, maybe even manga format. And considering that that is a point in history that is within living memory, getting a Sorkaz or someone that is still alive today as an operator would allow for the story to be told without necessarily breaking the timeline with an operator who might not be alive anymore. Although I would consider it a worthy sacrifice to get more of an insight into the history of Terra. And rounding out the video, I want to get your insight into this wonderful event. Are you currently seeking therapy? Is it an overhyped dumpster fire? Do you not like being traumatized by your gambling addiction? Let me know down below. Y'all be good people, and I will see you in the next one.